having separate wires for turn signals, because then you can have a whole nother separate set of lights, which are more visible, rather than using the brake light filament for flashing as well. I'd also like to mention that the conduit, the wires that are originally in here in this size conduit are a pretty tight squeeze as it is, so you're also allowing yourself just a little bit more room to work with. So this is the original clip that holds it to the chassis, and you know, they expand out a little bit and can accommodate that. When you get all this on the car and it's underneath there, I don't see how anybody is going to know any difference unless they're watching this video, of course. Another thing that can be very helpful at this stage are consulting the original drawings. This segment here tells you the diameters of the conduits and their lengths. Now, I would not say that the length is necessarily should be consulted from here. I prefer to lay them out and compare them. You know, with a lot of these cars, things were just so customized and made to the suiting of each car that you might find some is a little bit different than the other, and then it's not quite long enough to reach a clip. Another thing you have to be aware of is you have this accordion effect. So you need to take that into consideration, that you can make it a lot shorter, or you can make it a good bit longer. So keep that in mind. Don't stretch it out completely and use that as a measurement. You know, you want to flex it in a little bit. And I'm also going to show you how I like to cut this stuff. Bring the camera over. We'll cut a sample. This one looks like a good sample. I normally use one of these fiber cutoff type wheels. Goes through it very nicely, very easily. It will leave a little bit of a burr, so you're going to have to sand that down, smooth that off. You're also going to need a tool to go inside there and cut away that roughness, otherwise it's just going to dig into the wire. Then the ferrules, originally they were soldered on. At one time we used to solder them back on, but at this point I've been finding that using a good grade marine epoxy is just as suitable, if not better. A lot of times you can bring out that epoxy like right out to the lip, and then you have a nice area that's not going to want to dig into the wire. And then after I get them epoxied on, I'll mask this off, and then I spray it some with the reflective Krylon. And then that gives them, you know, this nice, I think that's a pretty nice looking ferrule and conduit piece. So again, this is why you take out your wiring as intact as possible and not just go about cutting it out and chopping it up in all these little pieces and losing control, because you want to be able to compare your lengths of conduit and also your wire, and so you can use that as a reference to make your new harnesses. So we have all of our flexible conduit pieces made. The large one. We have two smaller ones for the rear. We have two smaller ones for the right side front. And two smaller ones for the left side front. There's also a very small one, sometimes used for the horn wire. There's sometimes a small one like that, only much longer, for a center light or fog light. But we'll worry about that as we get a little further along with the wiring. So the next thing we want to do is we want to examine what wires are actually in this main length of conduit. As mentioned before, we have the high amperage battery watt cable. Then we have these smaller cables or lights for tail lights, brake lights, trafficators, and one called body lights. And then this wire is a 4-conductor wire for the fuel gauge. This one is either a blue wire or a green wire. I'm pretty sure this is the green one. Green is typically used for side lights and tail lights. You have a blue wire, which is used for brake lights. Then you have a yellow and black wire that's used for one of the trafficators.
Text message from Tim Leifert.
A white and black one for a trafficator. And an orange wire for the body lights, which go to the body junction box. So the best thing to do is to make up a little sketch, perhaps like this, handwritten sketch, just to have an idea what's where, so you can keep a better track of it. I also recommend referencing a wiring diagram. This is the diagram from the owner's handbook, only enlarged and laminated. It gives you all the colors of the wires and where they go. It also gives you a number, which looks like a fraction. And what that is one number stands for the gauge of the strand of a wire, and the other one tells you how many strands of wire there are in that wire. So I do have a reference so that you can correspond that with American type gauging. And of course you have this, which helps the position give you an idea where the conduit is positioned in the chassis. So the next thing I wanted to do is show you about some of the specialized terminals and connections that you'll find in your wiring. This terminal, which is a specially made terminal by Rolls-Royce themselves, going on to the battery wire, is in that shape so that it will go and fit very nicely into the starter relay. Trying to use any other type of terminal will simply just not work. So the best option is to unsolder this terminal, clean it, and reuse it. Now you'll remember that we're going to a slightly larger cable, and getting it inside that area can be a little bit of a challenge, but you can expand it out a little bit and solder it on. So I'm going to unsolder that terminal and clean it up, just so you know what that's like. This is just a not a very strong soft solder. Melts very easily. Move any flammables just in case. And hit it with some heat. So I'm going to now clean up this terminal and prepare things for the next stage. And the next thing we're going to do is start feeding in our wires. As I had mentioned, we have blue wire. We're going to use a 14 gauge. This is cloth covered wire, which looks very much like the original. And it has a PVC coating that's underneath the woven cloth, and it's a copper stranded wire. The supplier that I prefer the most for those is Rhode Island Wiring in Rhode Island. So then we have our herringbone yellow and black for trafficator, herringbone white and black for the other trafficator, the orange for the body junction light box, and for the side light, tail light, we're going to use a green. Now for our turn signals that we're adding in, I use this, and I usually use it's a cloth covered wiring with a marker, a tracer on it. And it's, I believe, a 12 or a 16 gauge, which is more than suitable for a turn signal. Then for the other turn signal, I'm going to use this green and yellow. And then for the Smith's fuel gauge, I'm using telephone wire. It's a 4 conductor wire, which is what just about every telephone used to use. And it's got a red, yellow, green, and black wire. And fortunately, if you look in the wiring diagram, you will see that those are the same colors that were used for the petrol gauge. I don't know if it shows it in there or not. But there'll be more about that when we come to it. So anyway, I'm going to clean that terminal and get that prepared to be soldered on to the new cable. And and also I'm going to cut out sections of this wire and get all that ready to be fed into the new conduit. We're going to solder on our specialized terminal where that goes to the starter relay, connects the battery to the starter relay. We give it a generous amount of heat and then melt in rosin core solder. We don't want to get too much heat on the insulation of the wire. And we just feed it in and melt it down in. Still going to need a little more. So now you have all your wires cut to length. I figure out the length. Here's my formula. Oops. So we have the total conduit length, which is 14 feet, 168 inches. Then I figure what the distance is from the fuse panel to the beginning of the conduit, and then also from the conduit, from the very end of the conduit to out to where the tail lights and brake lights are. And so that's just basically how I arrive with these numbers. Realizing that not all wires go to the fuse panel, and some of them don't go all the way out to the end. So then you measure those areas as well. So at this stage, it's just a matter of feeding the wire into the... I have 3 of the wires here fed through the conduit, and these 3 are the ones that come out at the end of the large diameter conduit. I also have included this red wire, and that's for pulling through other wires, because I think that these 4 wires together are probably about the max that I'm going to be able to get away with and still be able to get our main battery cable in through there. So it's just pushing through, it's just about to the end. I'll give it a bit of a jiggling and flipping around, and sometimes that allows you to get another couple of inches. Tell I'm just really close to the end. You can see it wanting to poke through. Just a little caught on the edge there. And then now we can pull that through. You want to make sure not to take a whole lot, you don't want a whole lot of extra length from these wires hanging out at the moment. The battery cable needs to go in, and there's only a few inches that are to be exposed at the other end. So it's just a matter of working it through, pushing, pulling, pushing, pulling. Okay, so now we got all those situated into the large diameter conduit. And then we solder the remaining wires onto here so we can pull them through. did not have this black wire included because I just caught on to the fact that it needs to be included, and it's for the reverse light. And the reverse light is something the coach builder would have installed and not Rolls-Royce in this era, or this series anyway. If you look in your wiring diagram, you won't see any mention of the reverse light. I've also noticed that another wire I should feed through at this point is for the fuel gauge. Alright, so that's a little hard going, so I'm going to use my long tool for this in a separate one, because it's not going to solder on well to the other pool wire. Because of it being 4 conductor. There it is, right at the end there. So now we peel back the covering. Get some of these strands showing. And then just do a quick solder. Again, it's just to pull it through. air cooling. Trim off any sharp edges because they're just gonna hang up on you if you don't. And we just gently work it through. And there it is. And I'm just going to leave that soldered on the length because I might need it that way for getting it through the last section of conduit that goes through. I just want to lay out my wires nicely to get them out of the way so I can solder on the 4 remaining ones that we got to pull through. Should I say 5? I almost forgot to reverse again. So what you want to do with your pull wire is you want to expose a fair good length of copper there. Yeah, this is old wire and it doesn't like to skin off too well. Ouch, there it goes. So, and the reason why we want that length is so we can stagger down the wires we're pulling so we don't have a large lump of solder catching up on everything on its way down. So then, see, so then they lay a lot nicer that way. Now we just apply some solder. And the solder is an important ingredient with that because otherwise they're just going to fall off as they go traveling down through there. Doesn't have to be a super pretty joint, but needs to be strong enough to get the wires through there. Trim off any lumps that you can get. Make sure they're going to stay attached. Now we start pulling our wire. Once we get it entered, it's usually not too bad from there on out. Have to be sure you don't have any knots or anything that develop right at the twists. You just got to work them through a little bit at a time. So I now see my startup end here coming through. Some of these have somehow managed to get themselves into knots. We don't want that. If you have a knot in that conduit, then it's going to cause lots of issues. Pull through a bit more. You have to watch out for twists.
Next message from Tim Lisa. Next message from Tim Lisa.
So again, just straighten them out. Feed in a few inches. And then regroup. Seems like a tedious and slow process, and it is, but then you get to a certain point and kind of start feeding it through the other conduit sections. When you get your wires pulled through to this point, then you can cut off the ones that stay at this section of the conduit, which is the body wire, trafficator wire, then another trafficator wire. Then we can pull the remaining wire through the next section of conduit. We didn't attach these to a pull wire, so we'll fish those through individually, and hopefully that'll work out. We then have this very long section. That's the next one, and I'd put a red marking there. I'll try to get them both through together at the same time. We're pretty close to the end there. And there's one of them. There's the other one. Then the red wire to use to pull the remaining ones through, which is right, left turn, tail, that. Hopefully we can get this blobby group of wires through there. If not, we might need to trim things down a bit or even resolder. And a wire that came off. So I'm going to have to resolder. So we have our pull wire resoldered to the wires that need to go through there. And for those of you who are super observant, you may notice we added in another wire. That is for the reverse light. When you look in your original wiring diagram, you won't see anything about a reverse light. The reverse light was something that the coach builder would have added in. So therefore, the company did not supply the wire. They just relied on the coach builder to put that in there. But I like to put it into the harness because they're all going to the same place. It's more protected and just makes more sense. Okay, so all the wires have now come through. So now I need to get more length here to put through the other. So now the next group of wire goes through this section of conduit, except for the fuel gauge wire. So since I had to add in that reverse light wire at the last minute, I soldered it on to a piece of welding cable. And that works for when you need to get one wire through a crowded harness there. And sometimes it's not long enough, so you have to solder it together. So I'm going to send that wire through this conduit first. I don't think it'd really make a difference either way. It probably would have been better if I sent the other group through, but this will be fine. Alright, so now we have our other group pulled through. I'm just going to tighten them up. Get a little twisted here. All right. So at this point we can cut off our pulls. They can get used again. So I will just neaten them up as they're here, and then I'll figure out how much lengths we need on these ends according to our diagram we made there and here, and then we can set those aside while we build the other front harnesses. Okay, so now I have enough length here I can feed through these other conduits. Next conduit here. So that's why I like to attach these particular wires on there, onto the pull wire. I can just eliminate the times I have to resolder there. We don't want to forget our fuel gauge wire. A little more length for that one. Get that one through. We have that through enough that I can cut off the cable there. I still need to work these through a little bit more to get this conduit section over these. So now that these are a little shorter, they're a little easier to manage. So we have it long enough to get it in here. Just about there. I'll start this on. Okay. So I'm going to leave them soldered all together like that, but I'm going to cut off this length, just to keep things together. So now I'm just going to continue to pull through these wires and get things sort of balanced out. On the very end in here, we have on our paper we need 3 feet. So I'm going to lengthen these out to 3 feet, coil these other ends up nice. I'm going to have to measure out this black wire and cut it off the spool. And yeah, we'll keep plugging along.